It's time to stitch the backing and binding for our spooky Halloween mini quilt. It's time for the backing and the binding, and I have fabric left over from the back of my Pumpkins and Potions quilt, and I have quite a bit. So I am going to use this pattern for the backing. I think that'll be super cute. And then for the binding, I am going to use this plaid, this black and white plaid. So let's get this cut and we can finish this cute quilt. For the background, I just cut it a little bit larger. I am going to stitch in the ditch, and I just cut it a little bit larger with my scissors. This is a background that doesn't have a right or a wrong way. Everything just kind of goes all sorts of ways, so it really doesn't matter how I put this on the back. But I will iron it and then sandwich it together. I'm not going to put another layer of batting since this is just a tiny wall hanging. I will just pin it and then just stitch in the ditch of all the seams. Now for the binding, the piece that I had, I was able to get 4 strips of 2¼ inch. That's how wide I like to cut my binding. And I don't need that many to go around this. I need just a little over 2, maybe like 2¼ strips. But I'm going to go ahead and piece all of these together, and whatever I have left over in binding, I just will put in my stash. I keep extra binding so that I can use it as like a scrappy binding on another project sometime. So I am going to sew the binding strips together, just of course like any other binding. I will lay one right side up. The next piece I will lay at a 90-degree angle right side down, and I will just sew from the corner of this top piece down diagonally to the bottom right corner. And so then when I flip that open, I will have the continuous binding. And so I will do that to sew these together, and then I will press this in half. Also, when I stitch in the ditch, I am going to use a mono poly thread and bobbin, and I think I'm going to use the clear. If I had all dark fabrics like the orange and the black together, I would probably use the smoke color, but I have a lot of light, fabrics, and so I am just going to use the clear on everything. All right, let's get started. So I pressed the seams open for the binding, and then I did press in half. And again, I have a lot more than I need, and I will just keep the extra with my stash. And then here is what the backing looks like with the stitch in the ditch. And then I just trimmed the outside. So now I will get ready to put my binding on. So for the binding, I mentioned that I am going to sew it to the front and then flip it around to the back. So it'll look a little bit more like piping. It'll be thinner on the front than it will on the back. And that again is mostly because that will give an even look to these two. This needs the 1/4 inch taken off so it matches this size. And if I sew it to the back and wrap it around to the front, and there's more in the front, you can see this would look thinner than this border, and I definitely don't want that. And also up here, I'm pretty close, and also the batt. If I were to sew this on the back and wrap it around the front, it would probably cover up the bottom of the batt, because this, the 1/4 inch where I'm going to sew, is right at the bottom of the tail. So I'm going to start, I think I'm going to start over here. I'm going to leave 8 inches or so, and I'm going to start probably about in the middle, and I will just clip. You don't have to clip, you can just, run this along as you're sewing. Start sewing 1/4 inch, and then when I get to the bottom, I will stop and back stitch 1/4 inch from the edge of the quilt. Then I'll cut my thread, and then I will fold this piece of binding up and over. And it will, I don't have to lay it out like this, but essentially you want this to run parallel, and then you're going to fold this piece back to line up with that next raw edge. And then when I start sewing, I'm not going to start sewing right at the end. I'm going to come in about 1/4 inch. I don't have to measure. You don't have to mark. Just a few, stitches in, and start sewing. So there will be this flap, and that will create the miter on the other side when we go to turn it. So when you're sewing, you can just flip it over like that. You don't have to, lay that completely out. And then start sewing, and I'll do that around all of the edges. I will finish with just a couple of inches down this last corner, and then I will tie off and cut, and I will have this piece to sew to this piece, and I'll show you a super easy method. There's no measuring, and it's super fast and easy, and it won't look any different than where I joined the binding to put the strips together. You won't be able to tell that it's a different kind of join. All right, so let's get this binding started, and then I'll show you how easy that is. I ended about an inch from the last corner, and I have to join and then sew the remaining piece. So the piece that I started with, I am just going to about halfway, you don't have to measure, but just you know, a little bit up from where I ended. I am just going to lay this flat, and then I am going to fold back and make a crease. You could take it to the iron, but a crease with your finger, as long as you can see that crease, and when you open it up, you can see the crease that I just made as well as the center fold. And so it makes this little plus mark, and that is important to line up to the next one. So once I fold this back, I need to do the same thing with this. Now, if this were a bigger quilt, I would probably, you know, leave about 10 to 12 inches unsewn. It makes it a little bit easier. But what I need to do now is take this piece that I just ended. I'm also going to lay that flat and fold it back. And I want to fold it so that I have about 1/8 of an inch or so, 1/16 of an inch, you don't have to measure, gap between these two folds. I do not want those folds touching, or the binding is going to be too loose. So there needs to be a gap. And the same thing, this will form like a little plus, the center, and then this is what I just creased. So now I am going to just take and kind of pleat this to get some of the bulk out. I need to be able to have this loose in order to sew those together. Now I could have maybe started even farther down here and left myself more room, but I think this will work. So I've just pleated to get that, you know, quilt a smaller little piece. So now what I need to do is take this bottom piece without twisting it. It goes up like this. I just need to open it up and put it flat down so that I can see that little plus. And it's definitely easier if I would have left it longer. In fact, what I probably could do is take this first stitching out that I did to sew this binding on. I think I'm going to take a little bit out so that it's a little bit easier to show. So I still have the fold where I made the crease, and that still will work. So now again, without twisting, this, you know, goes up. I just need to open this up and lay it flat so that I can see that little plus. You can see where I creased it. Then this top piece that I ended with would go down like this without twisting it. I need to bring this fold and line it up with the crease that I just made. So I will just, you know, essentially swing it over. Here's the crease. That is going to line up with this fold. The fold in the binding is going to line up with the crease on this side. And then I just will hold that and open it. So essentially I have these little two plus marks right on top of each other. So if you look, here's the center fold, lines up with the crease that I made on this top piece. And then the center fold in this top piece is lining up with the crease. So I hope that that makes sense. Those little plus marks just line up. Now it is, you know, of course, easier to pin to get this to the machine. And what I'm going to do is just like I did my other binding, I'm going to sew from corner. I have now a corner to aim for, and then down to where they meet down here. So where this little V that they meet up at the top to this little V that they meet at the bottom, I'm just going to sew a diagonal line. Again, you could mark that. You could take a little ruler and mark if that's helpful. But right now, since we made this little plus mark, there is something super small to shoot for just by eyeing it. I can start my needle, eye for the center, and then continue. So I'll just swing this around. And I am going to have to change my foot. I had put my 1/4 inch foot on for the binding. So let me change that. And I always like to put my needle down so that I can put this little V right here that's formed by these two. I kind of just push that up right at my needle, making sure this is all flat. And again, I'm going to aim first for this little center right here, and then down towards this end. So one of the most important things before trimming this is to make sure that it was sewn correctly. So if I take out those clips and just kind of tug on this, it will lay out and you can tell that it's sewn correctly. If for some reason it's twisted or doesn't lay flat, you would pick that out and re-sew. But always check before cutting, or you're going to have to piece the binding back together. So now I'm just going to cut. And then there's the binding, and it will look exactly the same. Now you can take this to the iron and press it open. I, at the end, just like to finger press it because I always want to just get this done. So you can just finger press it so that when you fold it, you know, it stays open. So again, you could clip it if you wanted to. But because I left that little gap, this fits perfect, and there's, you know, the binding isn't too big. And make sure this is open. And then I will just start and sew this last little piece of binding. So after sewing it on, I think I'm going to iron it and then trim some of these away. But you can see that now that I sewed the 1/4 inch, the two borders are the same size. This little bat, the binding comes right to the tail, so that was a good choice. If you know that when I flip this, it looks like binding, and on this side, you'll see how wide it is. And again, I like that look. It just depends on what I'm doing, because that would have covered too much of this up. It might have come all the way to the S, and it definitely would have covered up the bottom of the bat. So what I'm going to do is just lightly give it a press, just kind of press it up. When I get down by the owl, of course, I need to be careful. I can put a pressing cloth just so that I'm not getting directly onto that vinyl. I've got some. So when I flip this binding around, you can see it, makes a nice corner. And on the back, it gets flipped around, and this, just continues to lay flat. And then this will be folded. And then the back will also make a nice mitered corner. But again, you can see how much wider this border is versus the front. And I do love the thicker, and again, it just depends on the project. So what I'm going to do is, once I'm happy with the corner, I usually will clip that just to make it easier. You could do it right at your sewing machine. I find it's easier to, get them nice before I get to my sewing machine. So again, there's the front, and the back kind of just folds and makes a nice corner. So then on the front, look how cute that looks. Just looks like it's got a little piping border. Now I'm going to go back and change to my clear monopoly thread, and I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and that will catch the back since the back binding is thicker, and I will be done. So before I sew my binding down, I pulled out my little stand that I am going to hang this on. Fits just perfect. And I need something to hang this with. So I pulled out some ribbon that had come in some packaging of something, and it's just a big long, piece. And I ironed both ends because I'm not sure how long I want these ties, so I'm not going to cut them. So I have both, ends ready to go. And what I'm going to do is just fold this in half, about 8 inches, and that's probably way longer than I need because that's 8 inches folded. And then I'm going to sew this into the binding. So I think what I'm going to do is measure in 2 inches just from the inside of the binding. And I'm just going to put a pin, and then 2 inches from this side. And then I'm going to flip this to the back, and I'm going to again fold this in half, and I am going to place this under the binding so that when I top stitch or stitch in the ditch on the front, this gets trapped in, and then I can tie it. So I'm going to line this up with the 2-inch mark, the right side of this one lined up. Here's the 2-inch, and just fold that down. I'm going to check that to see if I think that's far enough. This one I'll do the left side, so I want the edge of the ribbon, I want the ribbon closer to the outside next to the 2-inch mark, if that makes sense. Okay, so let me turn this over and see if that looks about right. I think that looks about right. I don't want it too close to the edge, and I don't want it too close in because it's so small. So again, when I go and stitch in the ditch and I catch this ribbon, I need to make sure, of course, that when I stitch, this is flat down, but then when it's stitched on, this will be able to be pulled up and tied to the stand. And so now I'm just going to go ahead and just cut Again, this is probably a lot longer than I needed. All right, so I'll just make sure that they lay flat when I stitch in the ditch, because I'll stitch in the ditch from the front, and I don't want this to flip up, so I'll just, pay special attention when I'm coming to the top. All right, so now I can stitch in the ditch, and this will be done. So here is the little mini quilt with the binding. I love it. And so again, I just stitched in the ditch right along the binding, and in the back, you can see that the ribbon was just caught in the stitching. And so when I tie it on, it will just flip up, and it will tie to the quilt rack. All right, so let's tie it on and see.